There are calls for the government to formally apologise to thousands of women in England and Wales whose babies were taken away from them simply because they were not married.
Let's take you through some of the key facts. This was an inquiry by the Joint Committee on Human Rights, and it looked into the treatment of unmarried mothers and the 185,000 babies forcibly taken from them for adoption from 1949 to 1976. It was launched last autumn following years of campaigning by some of those mothers and the children they lost, and its report is being published today. The key demand is for a formal government apology, along with more support for those who've been traumatised by their experience by giving better access to specially trained counsellors and improving access to birth records.
Very pleased to say we're joined now by Judy Baker, who had her baby daughter taken away from her in the 1960s, and Liz Harvey, who was taken away from both her parents in the 1970s. Very pleased you're both here this morning. Judy, can you just tell us, I always feel awful in these circumstances because it's such a massive part of your life, this, and we get you to condense something so emotional with so many implications down to a short moment in time. But can you do that for us? There you were, you had your baby.
Yeah.
What happened next?
OK, already I had been conditioned, even before she was born, that the route to go down was to give her up for adoption because somebody else could give her a much better life than I could because they were married and financially stable and I was pregnant, single and without support. There was no financial support offered by the government. There was no counselling. It was just taken as a given that the baby would go.
So there was an assumption that
absolutely.
You felt was overwhelming, that this is something that should happen.
Absolutely.
And what did happen? What unfolded after that?
So I had my daughter and we spent 7 weeks together, and then I took her to the adoption agency and I went in one door, she went out in another door with her adoptive parents.
The picture we're showing now is your baby daughter?
Is my baby daughter, yes.
Now, just take us through the story beyond that, because this is an important time, you know, the idea that there should be an official apology. But take us through the story. What happened after that?
So, as I say, there was no counselling, there was nothing. I was expected, I was told that I should just go on, live my life, I'd have other children, which I never did, and it would be as if it hadn't happened. I mean, how ridiculous is that, you know? How can you have a baby and pretend it never happened?
So did you never... Were you able to... Like, your family must have known, but...
My family knew. I didn't tell anybody else because I was ashamed.
You didn't tell anyone else you were a mother?
No. So when people asked me, do you have any children? I said no, because how do you say, oh, yes, I've got a daughter, but actually, you know, I gave her to somebody else to raise.
So she... what did you know about her? Anything?
Nothing.
So yet you came to meet her?
She found me. There is something called an adoption register held by the GRO where you could put your details. There was another register held by an organisation called NORCAP, and it was through that my daughter found me. And through a social worker approached me in 2000.
And did she have any idea of the circumstances that she had been put up for adoption?
No, and what she believed was that I couldn't have loved her and that she had been inherently bad because I'd given her away.
And that obviously was not the case.
No, of course not. I love her. I loved her then. I love her now.
And all you can do with having been put in that situation is have the time now that you have to express that. And I see, you know, Liz, I see you nodding there, because that, just to pick up on the emotion, is that how you felt about the woman, the mother, who gave you up for adoption, or was told, as you now know, to give you up for adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up thinking that I was not wanted, and I had no idea. And as a child, that is really difficult to swallow. I found my birth mother. I didn't meet her till I was 28, which is quite late.
And did you go through the same process that
I
Judy's
did?
daughter?
Yeah, there's a contact register, and both parties have to agree and search for each other. and we shared letters and photos, but it took 10 years for me to actually meet her.
What do you know now about the circumstances that she was facing at that time?
There was coercion involved, and I believe it was the church, it was the state, it was the government, the maternity nurses, the social workers. That was definitely the common theme.
She wasn't married?
She was with my birth father, actually. They were together.
Married?
They just weren't married. And the narrative was, you're not fit to keep this baby, to raise it. You're going to put it up for adoption and give it to people who can, to more suitable parents. So there was the shame was that great.
What difference does it make, Liz, to you, this idea of an apology, the idea that something should be officially recognised in some way? How does that tangibly impact on you?
This is huge. This is the outcome we were hoping for. And to get that report is monumental, and it's very validating. You know, you can see the pain is still very raw today for all those birth mothers and adoptees and anyone that's been involved in this process. But this is not the end. This is actually just the beginning for us.
Meaning what?
An apology is lovely to have, and it's very validating, but we need access to proper adoption, trauma-informed therapy by experts. It's a very niche trauma that we suffer, maternal separation and loss. We also need access to our birth records, our adoption records, which show two completely different names. We need access to our medical records, our medical history. And I still don't know how the government's going to put all this in place. It's all so complex, but there are certain things we need to happen now. You know, we'll carry on campaigning.
Judy, have you had any help, any therapy? I mean, this is one of the things that you've spoken about, any counselling?
I paid for counselling and I knew more than she did.
Right. Because, you know, we've obviously read the notes. You and your daughter have had an up and down relationship.
Absolutely.
And when I think, you know, you want access to the birth records, what does that then do for the relationship your daughter has with her adopted parents?
Exactly.
Who are mum and dad,
Absolutely.
you know, as they were.
Absolutely.
Yeah, messy is exactly the right word.
Yeah.
And how do you, I mean, you've explained more, it's more than an apology.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't fix it.
You can't fix
reverse.
it.
You can't change the fact that damage happened, but the damage that has hit you, and it is damage, can be helped, perhaps.
Yes. I think that it's a very isolating experience. You believe, many of us mothers believe that we were the only ones that this had happened to because we never talked about it. So now what's coming out is actually we're not alone. There are thousands of us who suffered in this way. And those of us perhaps who are maybe further on in our journeys. I mean, I've been reunited with my daughter for 22 years. I've done a lot of work around that. I've done a lot of reading. I've informed myself. I've run support groups. I've done a lot to help myself. So we can help each other, but we shouldn't just be relying on peer support. We should be able to have peer support supported by professionals that can deal with this trauma.
You alluded to this a moment ago, Judy, but I think it's quite hard for people who have not been through, or both of you have been through, to comprehend the extent to which it overtakes your life.
Yes.
Can you give people a sense of that? You know, how much of your space in your head it occupies, both in the past and even now?
Okay. In the past, I was, I believe, fortunate that I just built a brick wall around my emotions. So I did shut down. But what I see now with hindsight is that the way that I lived my life was affected by the trauma. So I didn't look after myself. I didn't have healthy relationships. I did all sorts of things that actually were harmful to me. After my daughter found me, the brick wall come tumbling down, like really hugely, and it was a terrible time of grief, because when you lose a baby to adoption, you can't mourn because the baby hasn't died. So you have no welcome for that baby because it's going to be living with somebody else, and you also have no chance to grieve because the baby hasn't died. So all of that grief eventually came out extraordinary. I wanted to tear my clothes. I drove up onto a high point and sat in the car and just screamed. It was really very scary.
There's a sense of identity that changes for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you grow up in an adoptive family without, you have no genetic mirroring. You don't look like the people in your family. You don't necessarily behave like the people in your family, and that sense of identity is missing. It's missing. It's very confusing.
I think you've articulated, both of you, just how clearly this apology, more than an apology, what it leads to is why it's important, and also just why it's so important that we've discussed it. And for you two to talk about your personal stories, identity, your trauma, the pain, it's very, very brave, and it's needed, it's required. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Judy Baker and Liz Harvey, thank you.
I have to say, the stories are very harrowing. You both have a great energy around.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I know it's an
You
appropriate
do.
thing to say, but when you first
You
came in
do.
here, there was a lovely energy around you both. So.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank
you so
honestly,
much.
it's a very, very fulfilling. Thank you.